Hey everyone, thanks for joining me for another devlog for Dauphin, my 2D open world RPG about a marine biologist. It is good to be back. It's been about 5 months since the last Dauphin devlog that I released on this channel, and the reason for that is that for the past 4 or so months, I have been working on a pretty bold challenge to see if I could create a small game from scratch and release it on Steam. I wanted to do this for a couple reasons. One, to kind of give myself a mental break from Dauphin and kind of get the creative juices flowing somewhere else, but also to help prepare me for releasing Dauphin at some point in the future. Going through a Steam release is something I've never done before, and when it's Dauphin's turn, I want to do a really good job. Even if it took a little longer than expected, I'm thrilled to announce that this challenge was a success. Over the past handful of months, I built a little productivity timer app called Range. Range is basically a gamified Pomodoro-style timer that helps you break your working sessions and associated tasks that you want to complete into small chunks and encourages you to take short breaks in between. You can chain all this together for longer working sessions to help you feel a little more energized and productive. As you complete all these sessions, you'll unlock new environments that your car passively drives through on your second screen, as well as a bunch of different upgrades and accessories and different vehicles themselves. If this sounds interesting to you, or you just want to help out the channel, you can visit the Steam store page, which I'll link down below, and give it a wish list. It's going to be for Windows, Mac, and Linux and cost just $3. I'm a little nervous for the release, but also very excited. I hope some of y'all check it out. Regardless of how the launch goes, I'm considering this project a total success. I learned so much about all the small details that are required to get a game ready for release, not only on the development side, but on the Steamworks side as well. But more importantly than that, it has me so charged up to get back to work on Dauphin, and I'm really excited to do that in today's video. So where exactly are we with Dauphin? 5 months ago in the last devlog, I had just wrapped up some major improvements to what I would call world building. Basically my ability as the developer to create very realistically shaped islands and automatically populate those islands with the correct organisms based on the island's chosen biome. With the ability to now create pretty cool and very detailed islands and of course have the player sail between them, my intent was to move on to Dauphin's questing system, which would of course incentivize the player to move between different areas of the world and unlock new content by completing quests. The questing system is definitely still my priority, but I'm not quite ready to jump off the deep end back into feature development yet. It has been about 5 months since I've looked at this giant code base, and I want to spend a week kind of easing back in and maybe taking some of the things I learned from finishing up Range and incorporate those into Dauphin as I kind of get comfortable with the code base again and get ready to dive back into feature development towards my goal of having that vertical slice. I actually think this will be pretty fun. What I'd like to focus on here is Dauphin's entry point, meaning what happens when I run the game. I haven't thought about this for years since I built out this initial title screen and programmatically skip right past it to launch straight into the game as I'm working on feature development. If I disable my bypass and launch the game, we land on this title screen, which looks pretty nice. I've been working on this art a little bit over the years, but there's no actual way to get into the game. And finishing up Range has me kind of motivated to make this experience a lot better and make Dauphin feel more playable. Before I do that, I have one action item to update Dauphin from Godot 4.3 to Godot 4.4 because, as always, I want to be taking advantage of all the new stuff the Godot engine team is working on with their latest release. I don't know how long that's going to take. Hopefully it won't break too many things, but that's where I'm going to start my Sunday afternoon. We'll touch base once I've made some progress. All right, y'all, quick update. Got a little bit of good news and bad news. Thankfully, the good outweighs the bad here. I was able to execute the upgrade to Godot 4.4.1 with no issues at all. The engine and the editor took care of everything, updating files with no problem. And I'm able to open up the project with no warnings or errors and, of course, run the game with no issues, which is great. The bad news came when I started looking into my title scene here. I was trying to figure out how come nothing shows up when this logo slides down. I thought I had some controls here to actually let you launch into the game. Sure enough, I do, but as you can see, as I'm toggling the visibility on these different control elements, these are way out of date. I don't know if something got screwed up when I upgraded back from Godot 3.x to Godot 4, but there is a ton of work that needs to be done here. I basically need to roll this UI from scratch, but that'll be a good way to kind of get back into the flow here. Obviously, one thing I need to work on that scene is buttons, and what we're looking at here is actually a modular text button scene that I created for range. What's nice about this button is that it's very easy to create new copies of it and change the text, and I have a lot of helpful code behind it to help do things like change the textures when I might want to, support a few different interaction modes, and even behave really nicely both with mouse and keyboard and controller. I really don't know why I haven't gotten around to creating helpful modular UI components like this for Dauphin, and I'm thinking now's the time. Hey everyone, quick update. It is Monday morning just before work here. I got up early and had a really enjoyable session diving back into Dauphin's codebase this morning. All I really tried to do was bring in my modular text buttons that I created for range. I'll of course continue to tweak these and make them look a bit different from what I built for range, but for now it's just nice to have a modular component for text buttons like this. I've gone ahead and started the effort of basically rebuilding the title screen UI from scratch. I scrapped all the stuff that was in these UI containers before, did a little bit of restructuring here. You can see, this is not going to be the final product of the title screen, but we're in a much better place to actually get the player into launching the game. Apart from the title screen, I was really just having some fun this morning and decided I wanted to bring over the splash screen that I created for range with, of course, some tweaks to the color palette. I really liked how this turned out. I thought it was pretty simple, yet still kind of elegant. And I dug up some old iPhone footage of the beach to provide some sound effects here, so I'm just going to be quiet real quick and play the introduction to Dauphin. So that was kind of fun. I like the way that's turning out so far, but I'm going to try to get myself back on track here by next working on what happens when the player clicks the start button. Previously, what I did was show a collection of 3 of these save slot containers. Each of these is meant to be a card that represents a particular save slot with some kind of reflection of what the player is currently equipped with in this save, as well as maybe a label or 2 with some metadata, like how long you have played this particular save. All of this is broken since, I last worked on it 2 or 3 years ago, so I want to revisit this, and I actually never implemented the portion of this where the player showed what they have equipped in the save file. I don't think this is going to be particularly trivial, but I do think it's going to be fun to work on, so that's what I'm tackling next. Off to work for now. We'll see if we can get another update in tomorrow. Morning folks, I'm joining you again before work here on Tuesday. Yesterday evening and this morning I've made a bunch of progress on the ability to select a save slot when you boot up the game. So I want to show you that, as well as a general overview of how saving in Dauphin works in general. First we'll take a look at these save slots. If we hit the start button, you'll see that we have 3 of these cards here. We have 2 options for new saves, which don't do anything yet. In the future these will take you to probably character customization. But for the 1 save slot that I do have, you can see we have a fully populated preview of the player with the equipment that they're actually wearing in the save file, as well as the name, which is something you'll set during character customization. If I click on this populated save card, we'll boot straight into Dauphin, and you can see that the player is indeed wearing his mask and snorkel. Let's start by taking a quick look at the save slot card, because this is actually pretty straightforward. You can see that this is a basic control, and as a child I have this player appearance node, which really just has a bunch of sprites that we're using to compose the player's appearance. We have a sprite for the major body parts, the head, torso, legs, and feet, and for each of those body parts we have an equipment sprite that sits below it in the hierarchy, so it renders on top for the various pieces of equipment. In the script itself, we can jump in here and see that really the way we're setting this up is by grabbing the save game that is meant to be associated with this particular card. So we initialize the card with the save slot. We ask the game manager to give us the actual save file associated with that slot number. And from there, we populate the card using the save game. This is where we go through and set all the different sprites. We set the label for the name, and we're pretty much good to go. If we take a look at my game manager global singleton class, we can actually see how I'm loading up this save game. I'm happy to say that after a bunch of cleanup, I was able to really look through and condense all of my saving and loading logic into about the 50 lines that you see here. So it's very straightforward. For saving a game, I start by creating my file path, which is concatenated using a constant string template as well as the save slot number, meaning 1, 2, or 3, which corresponds to those 3 cards we were looking at. From there, I open up a save file with write access. In terms of the data itself that I actually want to save, I am converting my save game resource to a dictionary and serializing this as JSON. The reason I'm doing this is that from my understanding, if you choose to use Godot's built-in resource saver and load resources, it can allow for arbitrary code execution if for some reason you are sharing resource save files with others online. So this is a little bit safer from my understanding, and it's also more flexible because I can choose exactly how I want to serialize this JSON. For my load function, you can see that this does not return void like my save function, which writes to disk, but instead it returns a save game resource built for me. So this is very similar. We build the same save file path. If we don't find anything at that path, we return null here, so we don't get a save game back, which is important. But if we do find a file, then we can open it with read access. We can grab that JSON data that we serialized previously, and then create a new instance of our save game resource and use my load from dictionary helper function to actually create this resource and populate it with that JSON data. Real quick, if you're curious what my save game resource looks like, this is it. It's kind of a mess, but this is honestly just where I dump everything that needs to be saved. Right here is the all-important save to dictionary helper function. And what you'll notice is that for all the other resources that I care about saving, I have also implemented a save to dictionary function. So for example, we need the organism list to be saved to a dictionary. If I jump into that resource and scroll down, we can see this save to dictionary function implemented. This organism list has a bunch of individual organisms, and these organisms themselves also implement save to dictionary. So in this way, we can kind of step through all these different calls when we want to save the game and make sure that all of the objects I care about are in the correct format. Finally, to close the loop up here with the title screen, we can see that in the ready function, I am looping through the maximum desired number of save slots to display, and for each iteration, I'm creating one of those card UI elements and setting it up with its save slot number. From here, when one of these cards is selected, I'm calling this function load save slot, and all this is doing is calling initialize game back in my game manager, which is actually loading the save game for this particular slot and doing what we need to launch Dauphin. It has been very satisfying to clean up all this code the past few days, but I'm not quite done yet because I still have my very ugly options screen. I have 2 things I want to do here. One, of course, clean up the UI, but number 2, much as I did with my save system, I want to clean up my preferences system. Now the preferences, if you don't know, is a separate file into which you save user preferences for things like audio and display settings. These are more of a per device configuration, meaning something that's not necessarily shared through a system like Steam Cloud Save. So I want to get all this up and running and cleaned up, show you how it works, and I think that'll be a really nice place to call it for this week. Off to work yet again. We'll catch up soon. Hey y'all, welcome back. I think I'm ready to close out the week here with one final development update. Thankfully, I had no issues kind of sprucing up my options screen, both on the title screen as well as my pause menu, which we can see here if I press escape. I actually made this look a little bit nicer too now that I'm using my reusable buttons here. But when I click on options, you'll see a still incomplete but much nicer looking options screen. I don't have anything in the display section yet. I'd like to, of course, offer options for full screen and borderless and different resolutions and anything else that I might come up with as I continue Dauphin's development. But right now I do have some working options for audio, specifically just changing the output of my 3 audio buses, master, music, and sound. If we take a look at this options UI scene, it's pretty straightforward as we'd expect, but I do want to call attention to a few things here. Something I'm learning as I work more on UI, both in Dauphin and projects like Range, is that Godot actually has some nice tools for kind of a declarative approach to UI. What I mean by that is instead of going in and manually setting the transforms for various pieces of UI on the screen, which in some cases is impossible if you're using containers correctly, we really should be leaning into things like the vertical box and horizontal box containers to lay things out predictably for us and in a way that responds really well to changing display sizes, for example. This is very similar to things like Swift UI, which is the UI framework that's used to build modern iOS apps in terms of vertical boxes and horizontal boxes. It's the same language. If you'd like to see a video on this, I'd be down to make a Dauphin deep dive, so just let me know if, like me in the past, you might have struggled with UI development. Anyway, what I'd really like to talk about is how these horizontal sliders work. Of course, I have one for each volume bus here, and if we jump into my script, you can see that I actually have 2 signals that I'm connecting to for each of these sliders. For example, for my master slider, I listen to both value changed and drag ended. This is important to me because I want to do 2 different things as the player is interacting with the slider. As they're moving it up and down, I want them to be able to immediately preview what that change in volume sounds like. So on value changed, what I'm actually doing is signaling out to my audio manager, which we'll look at in a second, to change the volume of the relevant bus. When the user makes a decision and ends their drag, this is when we actually save this to their preferences. First, we'll take a quick look at my audio manager here, which is a global singleton class. And all this is doing is connecting to that signal we just looked at and using actually Godot's recommended usage of linear to dB, as you can see from this documentation here, to set the volume of this bus based on that slider value. If we take a look at my preferences class here, we can actually see how I'm persisting the user's choices to disk here. You can see at the top that I have my desired file path for this config file, the config file itself, and then the actual data, which, as you can see in a moment, is going to be our source of truth as we're reading and writing preferences. Saving and loading this file is pretty straightforward. We can loop through all the information in our prefs source of truth here, write it to that config file, and then save it to the path that we care about. Similarly, when we want to load this file, we can load it from the path and parse all the data that we care about out of that file and populate our source of truth. For my helpers down here, this is pretty straightforward. These are just nice little functions to help me save and access preferences without having to walk through the dictionary as you see me doing here in the code. So if I want to save the master volume, all I have to do is call this function and provide the volume, and this function will know where to save it in the preferences. Similarly, if I want to load the master volume, for example, when I'm initializing my options screen and I need to set the initial value of that slider, this function helps me get that value. Overall, I think the configuration system is easy to set up, and as you can see here in my user folder alongside my save file, I have my nice little Dauphin.cfg file. One more fun little thing I'd like to show you is related to this player preview that we built for the save slot card here. If I go ahead and load up this save and open my field notes, I noticed this as I was poking around more of Dauphin's UI earlier. I'm actually showing a preview of the player here within the equipment panel. Previously, this was just a static sprite of the player, but I realized I had built out all the functionality I needed to update this sprite based on what the player was wearing. So all I did was take what I built back for that save slot card, save it off as its own scene, and then import that scene straight here into my UI, and now I have a great little preview of the player when we're changing equipment. This week went by very quickly, but I'm happy with how I spent that time. It was really nice to be able to go in and actually make some meaningful changes to the user experience while also reacclimating myself to Dauphin's code base and really some important parts with my global components like the game manager and certainly my save system, which could always use improvement. I'll be the first to admit that this was not the most exciting devlog from a feature development perspective, looking at all the other features I've built across this video series. To me though, that's actually perfectly fine. I think when I got started making these videos years ago, it was more of a weekly or every other week progress update, no matter what I was working on. I think that feels a lot more organic, and it's also a lot easier for me to make without having to structure around creating giant cool features, which frankly is not always part of game development. Anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, let me know with a thumbs or a comment. I can definitely see myself making more of this realistic style of devlog going forward. I hope y'all want to join me. As always, I want to give a huge shout out to the folks who support this channel and Dauphin's development on Patreon. Garami supporters this month are Delius, Kyle Van Riper, David L., and Ben Van Dyken. Don't forget to check out Range on Steam if you're curious. I'm super excited for the launch next week. In the meantime, I think you can expect to see me again soon for another Dauphin devlog. Until then.